welcome back to another episode of Is Fitz Happy? I'm Luke.
And I'm Emma.
And we're discussing Chapter 13, Surviving. And we are in Keffria's point of view to start this chapter, but we will be jumping around quite a bit. They're on the Kendry, and they are sailing down the Reyn River and coming into view of Bingtown right now. When we last left off with them, they were searching for Malta because Reyn had seen Malta in a small boat on the back of Tintaglia, or clutched in the claws of Tintaglia, excuse me, because she wouldn't dare let somebody ride on her back.
Right.
So they searched the boat, or searched the river for Malta and the small boat. Didn't find her. We learn later that Reyn insisted that they turn back up towards Trehog and searched again, and now they're back down the river towards Bingtown.
Right.
So Keffria is kind of in a funk, convinced that Malta is dead, and so is Reyn, for that matter, as we see later. But Keffria is not doing well, and she is kind of... She notes a change in Selden, that he's distant ever since the buried city, and she has been distant as well because why love him too much? Like the others, he could be taken away from her at any time.
Right. And this is a really sad moment to be with Keffria. She truly believes that she's lost both of her other children and her husband, and through that grief is just kind of thinking, what's the point? Everybody I love is gone. And she notes that she probably should be cherishing Selden more, but she just can't bring herself to.
Selden is saying, "Are you coming to see? It looks really strange. Some people on the deck are crying." And so they get out on the deck, and Keffria sees that Bingtown Harbor is a boneyard. The masts of Ruin's vessels stuck up from the water. Kendry maneuvered carefully around the sunken ships, heading not toward the Liveship's traditional dock, but to one that was newly repaired. The clean yellow lumber contrasted oddly with the weathered gray and scorched black of the rest. Men on the dock waited to welcome them. At least, she hoped it was welcome.
Right. So a lot has changed since Keffria and her children fled to the Reyn Wilds. And this is the first time they're really getting to see all the destruction, because before, I guess we kind of skipped over what they saw as they fled because we kind of were brought to with Malta waking up in the cabin like halfway up the river. So we don't really know what it looked like when they left, but
we know that Bingtown was on fire.
Yes.
A couple nights before, or the night before that they fled. So.
Yes. So it's not necessarily a surprise that things are bad, but it's a lot worse than they probably realized it had been.
Selden asks, "Is Grandma all right?" And she replies, "I don't know." She was so tired of telling him she didn't know. She didn't know if his father was alive. She didn't know if his brother was alive. She didn't know what had happened to Malta. The Kendry had searched down the Reyn River to its mouth and found nothing. At Reyn's frantic insistence, they had turned back and searched up the river all the way back to Trehog. So now, again, she is thinking that, it's very hard to believe that Malta could be alive, but you just can say, "I don't know,"
Right.
to Selden, and that's it.
And she also notes that Reyn's insistence to keep looking for Malta is a foolish hope, but she understands it and is with him on hoping that Malta is alive.
Right. She also makes note that Jani Cooper's boarded the Kendry when they went back to Trehog and is with them now, so she is heading down to kind of ask the Bingtown Council for some things and talk to them down there. Politics-wise, Keffria isn't really paying attention to all of that, though. She's more focused on her own disasters, her own personal tragedies that have happened recently.
Right. And she also notes that since she's been on the Kendry, she has taken up watch every night to watch the waters because she doesn't trust the ship's crew with what her mother eyes can see.
Right.
I think directly what she says, but she also is searching, and she keeps thinking that she sees Malta throughout the journey, but it's always just a log or a ripple on the water. There's nothing actually there. And so it's just really been depressing for her. And even after they get out of the Rainwild River, she notes that she still continued to look. And it just sort of helps her feel better, I guess. But she does also note that there has been only one Chalcedian ship when they got to the mouth of the river that gave chase a little bit, but they outran it really easily.
During their journey, their lookout had sighted others, galleys in groups of 2 or 3, and 2 great Chalcedian sailing ships. All had either ignored the Kendry or given only token chase. What, the captain had demanded, were the raiders waiting for? So there's always, in this chapter, there's a question of what the Chalcedians are doing because they don't know that the Satrap is alive. They don't know that the Chalcedians have the Satrap now and are reformulating their plan.
Right. And on top of that, the singular ship that they came across that wasn't with groups of 2 or 3 is potentially the one that has Malta on it.
Potentially, but honestly, I don't think so because the Kendry sailed back up the river and then back down. So I feel like they would be at least a day or 2 behind it.
Okay.
I mean, it still could be. It still could be, for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe her mother's eyes saw it.
Yeah, I don't know. But either way, they're not even thinking about the fact that a Chalcedian ship could have picked up Malta off the river.
Right.
So they think she's just dead.
Malta was gone. Keffria did not know if she had died in the sunken city or perished in the river. That she would never know ate at her like a canker. Would she ever find out what had become of Wintro and Kyle? She tried to hope that they still survived, but could not. Hope was too steep a mountain to climb. She feared she would only fall into an abyss of despair when the hope proved futile. She lived instead in a suspension of all feeling. Now was all there was. So Keffria is not doing well, just kind of drifting through, and we switch points of view to Reyn, who's also on the Kendry.
Reyn is also not doing well, although in a much different sense.
He's convinced that Malta is dead.
Yes.
And he blames himself mostly.
Yes. He and Keffria both are sure that Malta is dead. And though his sadness isn't the same as a mother who's lost her daughter, he is very upset. And like you said, he's blaming himself. So there's a lot of that self-loathing happening. And he's finding it really hard to care, just like Keffria, about what's happening right now. Because what's the point?
Right.
What he cares about is gone.
And their kind of disappointment is a little bit different too, because Reyn saw Malta's face from the back of from the claws of the dragon, right?
Right.
And Keffria is kind of like, did he really see her, or was that just his hope?
Right.
So Keffria is like, I don't know if she died in the city or if she ever was on the river, but either way, she's gone. And Reyn's like, I couldn't find her fast enough.
Right.
It's my fault. It's my fault she went into the city. It's my fault that she had to survive this long. The only one I blame more is Tintaglia. So Reyn, as you mentioned, is not doing well either. He is next to his mother, and we get a little bit more about why Jani is coming along to Bingtown here. It's worse than I feared, his mother muttered beside him. How can I ask of the Bingtown Council? How can I ask aid of the Bingtown Council when their own city is a shambles and their coast menaced by Chalcedian ships? Because that is her mission here. Jani is afraid that Treyhog as a city will no longer exist because the quake was enough to bury the Elderling city, and the Elderling city is how they got most of their food. It is how they have their relationships in Bingtown. It is how they are able to survive there by getting those riches and bartering for things with Bingtown. And a lot of the Bingtown families will no longer have that income either from trading those Rainwild and Elderling goods. So she's there to try to salvage something.
Right. It's not a great time to be a Rainwilder or a Bingtown dweller because things are really going south quickly. And not only are they struggling with the destruction of the only livelihood of Reynwild, but Reyn also talks about how it's not just the goods that they're worried about, but the lineages dying out as well, because over the last 2 generations, less and less children have been born alive, and less Bingtown people are willing to go to the Reynwilds to marry in with the family, which is the goal of the Reynwilders, because children are more likely to live if it's from a Reynwilder. And the only reason Malta would have gone to Reyn is because he was able to pay for it. So he talks a lot about how forgiving the Liveship debt is a huge price to pay, but it goes to show that there's this trend of needing to pay something extortionate like that to get people to come. And if all of their livelihood is gone, people are going to have a hard time feeding their own family, let alone bartering a price for matches.
Gifts for the family of a prospective spouse had risen in size, value, and number. Witness his own family's willingness to forgive the debt on a Liveship simply to assure Reyn a bride. With Malta lost, Jani knew Reyn would never wed nor produce children for the Kupris family. The bride gifts would have been in vain. With the beggaring of Trehog, other Reynwild families would be sore pressed to feed the children they had, let alone negotiate for mates, as you mentioned. And it's particularly pressing because Reyn himself says in here, he did not expect to live much beyond his 30th year.
Yeah, because people, even when they are alive, die quickly.
Yeah, we were talking a lot early on about how, gross it is for them wanting young brides and things like that. But if they're 15, that's middle age for them.
True.
So they need to be married and start having kids, I guess, if they want to continue on living in that area.
Yeah.
A life expectancy of 40 years old maybe is really rough.
Yeah, I feel like 30 is a bit of an exaggeration on Reyn's part,
right?
Because
but he spends a lot of time in the city.
That's true. But I'm just thinking his mom is not from Bingtown, I don't think.
No, I don't think so.
And she's got to be older than 30. I guess
she's probably, I would guess 45.
Because I feel like, I don't know that it's ever talked about. I feel like she's older than Keffria. Maybe not by much, but how old's Keffria?
30 or something?
35?
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know. So anyway, I don't know.
35, yeah, probably.
And I guess, like you said, he's been in the city more than other people. And maybe that does accelerate your...
But also, if he's a second generation of being born in Reynwilds without somebody from Bingtown, it's probably a reduced lifespan each generation.
I guess. But they also mentioned that he's not as I don't know what the word is, touched by the Reynwild curse as other people.
So, at least not outwardly, but we know it changes your organs too.
Oh, that's true. Good point. I don't know.
So yeah, he is in his own feelings here and he's feeling very depressed. So that probably flavors his thought of, I won't survive past 30. Right. But he's probably thinking of, I won't survive past 30 because of my Reynwild thing, but also because of heartache.
Right.
So yeah, it's looking very, very bad for the Reynwild folk here. And Jani has come to Bingtown to beg aid and won't know if they're going to find it or even if Bingtown will be able to offer anything because it's such a mess.
Right.
As they're sailing in.
Yes. And Reyn feels bad for his mom for having to represent all of Reynwilds in this mess. However, he's also kind of pushing that aside because of his own grief. So he's dealing with not only the loss of the wonderful city that he has loved his whole life, but also Malta, which is his new love.
Yeah, he says that, the loss of Reynwilds could trigger a war, and the loss of the Satrap could trigger a war, which could mean the destruction of Bingtown, plus the loss of the city, are now just a backdrop to losing Malta. He had caused her death. By bringing her to his city, he had put her on the path to her death. The only creature he blamed more was Tintaglia, the dragon. He despised himself for the way he had romanticized the dragon. He had believed her capable of nobility and wisdom, had lionized her as the last of her glorious kind. In reality, she was an ungrateful, selfish, and egotistical beast. Surely she could have saved Malta if she had only put her mind to the task. For his mother's sake, he had tried to say something positive.
So I want to talk about this for a second, about Reyn's turn on Tintaglia. Do you think it stems from him needing to blame somebody besides himself for Malta's death, or do you think this is something that he really truly feels?
I think it's something he really truly feels because he's very quick to blame himself
Right.
for all the faults with Malta before this. And he still does blame himself. So I think he truly does feel some sort of disdain, again, at himself for trusting Tintaglia, but disdain at Tintaglia herself for not living up to the image that he had put her on a pedestal of, you know?
Right.
So I think it's a two-pronged attack. And yes, it's against Tintaglia, but the other prong is again at himself for romanticizing her.
Yeah. And I guess to me, it's like, why would he have romanticized her in that way anyway? Why is he surprised? She did help him. She was noble. I mean, she got him out of the hole. He doesn't know about her internal monologue of maybe not helping the insignificant aunt.
Yeah.
All he knows is that she left, gained strength, came back, and saved him in Selden from dying in the city. And then, even though he deeply wounded her pride by saying her name aloud to others, still took him to look.
He doesn't know that. She didn't say anything about saying his name.
I thought she did.
That was her inner monologue again.
Well, he knows that he offended her because she was angry. But anyway, either way, she still looked for Malta with him, told him where she was, and said, "I can't go down right now. I will drown them if I land."
The whole time is just making fun of him, telling him he's stupid and insignificant and stuff like that. So yeah, to him, this is the biggest tragedy of his life. To her, it was an inconvenience, which is why he thinks that she's egotistical and selfish and all that stuff, right?
I guess. It seems odd to me because I don't know. I guess it's like, first of all, she was petty enough to make his life a living hell for the last however many months.
That's why I don't get it.
And like, I don't know why he would still think she was this noble creature, but also she did help, and it's not her fault that he couldn't get to Malta. You know what I mean? Like, even if Malta had died, it wouldn't have been her fault necessarily. And it just, to me, feels like he's trying to ease his own guilt just a little bit to say, like, it's also the dragon's fault for not saving Malta.
Directing anger.
Yeah, I don't know.
So he points out that it looks like they're trying to rebuild some parts of it, and Jani says, no, not really rebuild, they're barricades. There's obviously fighting going on here. They arrive near the dock, and Reyn notices that it looks like some of them are traders, so maybe it is a welcome and not something else.
Right.
Someone cleared her throat, and Keffria is now at her shoulder. Or at Reyn's shoulder. I don't know what I will find at home, she said quietly, but the hospitality of the Vestrid home is open to you, providing that it still stands at all. We could not impose, Jani assured her gently. Do not be troubled for us. Somewhere in Bingtown an inn must still stand. It would scarcely be an imposition, Keffria insisted. I am sure Selden and I would welcome the company. Reyn suddenly understood that there might be more to this invitation than a simple return of hospitality. He voiced it. It might not be safe for you to return to your home alone. Please, let my mother and me arrange our business, and then we will accompany you there, to see you resettled. Actually, I would be most grateful for that, Keffria admitted humbly. After a moment of silence, Jani also sighs and is like, oh, I'm sorry, I've been paying attention to my own tragedy, then I didn't realize what it would be like for you to come home to this and maybe not even have a home to come back to.
Right. And I knew it would obviously bring sadness and sorrow, but I didn't really think about the danger aspect. I have been thoughtless.
Mm-hmm. So they're kind of marveling here that a lot of Bingtown is gone. They kind of established that there might be danger here. Reyn notices that Greg is one of the few that are waiting on the docks. And as soon as the ship is secured and the gangplank run up to it, people begin to surge forward and ask out questions. Reyn pushes his way to Greg, and he confirms that it is Reyn to Greg because he's wearing a hood and a veil.
Yes. Yeah, so he's not 100% sure.
Yes. Greg asks anxiously, has the satrap been found? Reyn shakes his head and Greg frowns, but then says, like, we need to get you away from here, all of you. I have a wagon waiting. I've had a boy watching for the Kendry from the headland for the past 3 days. Quickly now. There have been some wild rumors in Bingtown of late. This is not a good place for any of you. And he grabs some workmen's cloaks and says, put this over your Rainwald garb. So they're not very happy. Reyn and Jani are not very happy to be like covered up and hidden, but Greg seems to think there is danger in being a Rainwilder right now.
Right. And not just that, but the specific people who are there are in danger because it's Keffria and Selden, which we know as readers. But it's interesting to me how crabby that Jani seems to be in whenever they get to the wagon that Greg has waiting for them. He says, oh, there's a
sailcloth, a tarp, basically.
A tarp to put over you. It will help keep you from the rain. And Jani sarcastically says, and from prying eyes. And it just is so weird to me because, like, clearly something is wrong. They know Greg Tanira, and he's usually, you know, lighthearted and laughter, like full of laughter. And here he is saying, hey, you guys might be in danger. Come with me in disguise. And they're kind of just like, oh, I can't believe we have to put on fisherman cloaks. And that just made me laugh because it's like, you literally see the state of the town right now. Maybe take a breath and realize that this is necessary.
So Reyn asks some questions. Why is the harbor so empty? Where are the ships? And Greg replies, on the bottom, we're off chasing Chalcedeans. They made a poke at us yesterday. 2 ships approached the harbor with 3 others hanging offshore. Ophelia took out after them, and our other ships followed. Saw how they ran, but I don't doubt our ships caught up to them. We're still waiting for our ships to return. That didn't seem right to Reyn, but he couldn't put his finger on it why it disturbed him. Because obviously they were luring the ships away from Bingtown.
Yes. Yeah, clearly. Get Bingtown unprotected.
And maybe pick off the ships with other ones waiting in the harbor.
You never know.
They continue on their journey in the wagon, and it seems to Reyn that they take a roundabout path to the Tanira Manor. And eventually they pull in, and Ronica is waiting. We know Ronica is with the Taniras.
Yes.
And greets Selden with a hug. So they make it safe there. They're off the Kendry and in Bingtown.
Yes. And then we switch over to Malta, who is not safe and is now on the open waters in a Chalcedean ship.
Yep.
So the satrap isn't dead from bathing in the river water, but he is peeling like a fish. So
my skin is ruined. Such an unsightly pink shows beneath. My complexion will never be again as fair as it was. He looked at her accusingly. The poet Manke once compared the skin of my brow to the opalescence of a pearl. Now I am disfigured. Malta felt Kekki's knee bump the small of her back. Kekki lay on her pallet by the satrap's bed, and Malta was hunkered on the floor beside her. It was her place in the small room. Malta winced at the nudge in her aching back, but recognized the hint. She searched her mind, then lied. In Bingtown, it is said that the woman who washes her face once a year in Rainwild river water will never age. It is an uncomfortable treatment, but it is said to keep the complexion youthful and fair. Kekki breathed out a sigh of approval. Malta had done well.
So obviously Kekki has been teaching
Coaching,
Malta, while we've not seen them, and training her on how to stay alive and how to deal with the satrap.
Mm-hmm. They had emerged some days ago from the mouth of the river. The satrap had been angry that the Chalcedean mothership was not there to take him up, and Malta had been bitterly disappointed that there were no live ships guarding the mouth, and so she has decided to toss out all hope of rescue from now on. She'd been a fool to dream of rescue. Such dreams had only weakened her. Angrily, she purged her heart of them. No live ship patrol, no Reyn searching for her, no dreams at all. No one was going to magically appear and rescue her. She suspected her survival was in her own hands. So she's decided to, even though she hates it, make this her lot and take Kekki's warnings to heart and truly live in her role to survive.
Right. And we know that this is really dire, and potentially this could be why the ships had goaded the live ships away from the mouth to allow the satrap to be snuck out, I guess, of the Reyn wilds. But I guess that would mean that they probably have some way to communicate. They could have birds, I guess, communicating between ships. It feels odd that a bird could be trained to communicate on a ship, but I guess it's not out of the realm of possibilities. So potentially they've gotten message to the others. But either way, Malta is still in the same position she was before, except now she has, like her mother and Reyn, hardened her heart to hope.
Malta notes that they have turned north towards Chalced ever since leaving the river. The galley hugged the shore. If it broke up, they'd at least have a chance of reaching the beach alive. She judged the man was running for home and gambling he'd reached there with both ship and unexpected cargo intact. Because they were on the river for so long and it was acidic, it was eating away at the planks, and now Malta knows that the ship is taking on more water than it probably should, but it might still survive the journey.
Right. That's something that the captain is willing to gamble, apparently.
Water, Kekki croaked. She seldom spoke now. She no longer sat up at all. Malta kept her as clean as she could and waited wearily for her to die. So Kekki had swallowed way more river water than her body could handle, but not enough to kill her quickly, so her body is just slowly shutting down at this point.
Right. And Malta notes that there's a ring of sores around her mouth from the water, and that she can only imagine what her insides look like if that's what the water did to her mouth. And every time Kekki takes a drink of water, Malta has to dab away the blood that's coming out of her mouth. So it's not looking good for Kekki.
But the companion, despite her pain and weakness, had kept her word. Malta had kept her alive and seen them rescued, and now Kekki did her best to teach Malta how to survive. Seems like a really poor deal for Kekki, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because she asked Malta that on the boat, and then literally like 2 hours later, a Chalcedian ship was there.
Yeah.
Malta didn't do too much.
To be fair, Malta had been saving them the whole time.
Yes.
And Malta told her not to drink the water. She did it anyway. So.
Oh, victim blaming.
I'm not victim blaming. I'm just saying it's not that bad of a deal. I think it's apt.
I know. I was making a joke.
I know.
So Kekki is teaching Malta, as we have been talking about before, and it's basically, if the satrap complains, which he often does, say a little response to put a positive twist on it, or to tell him how brave he is for bearing this uncomfortableness.
How brave and wise and strong.
Other things that Kekki tells her Malta thinks are more valuable. For example, the crew are all horrible and leering at her and grabbing her and assaulting her. And so Kekki says, take some blood, wear it always, and then if they grab at you again, if they make a pass at you again, just say that you're bleeding. And she tells her the words in Chalcedian, and they won't touch you because there's a superstition in Chalced.
Right.
So tells her how to protect herself from the Chalcedian crew a little bit more as well.
Right. And not only just because it's out of the kindness of her heart, but also because if something happens to Malta, that diminishes the satrap's power and harms them all. So it puts them all in danger if something happens to Malta, which Kekki understands, but Kekki does not believe the satrap will understand.
Right. She says that they must not rape you. If they do, and Cosgo does not challenge them, they will lose all respect for all of us. Don't tell Cosgo. He would use it to make you obey, to threaten you, or give you to them to buy favor, like Serilla. We must protect you to protect all of us. So she teaches her the words and tells her about that. Malta's like, well, that's really stupid if they believe that, if that's going to keep them from me. And Kekki's like, well, let them be stupid.
Yeah,
It'll
be
protect
grateful.
us.
Be grateful that they're stupid. But she says, but they're not so stupid that they believe that a woman is always bleeding.
Right.
So they know that you can't be bleeding the whole time. It won't work forever.
Mm-hmm. That conversation had been days ago. It was the last time Kekki had spoken more than a few words to her. The woman weakened every day, and the smell from her sores grew stronger. She could not live much longer. For her sake, Malta hoped death came soon, though for her own sake, she feared Kekki's death. When Kekki died, she would lose her only ally. Malta was weary of living in fear, but she had little choice. Every decision she made in fear. Her life centered on her fear. She no longer left their chamber unless Cosgo ordered her directly. Then she went quickly, returned swiftly, and tried to meet no man's eyes. The men still hooted and clicked their teeth, but they didn't bother her when she was emptying the waste bucket, because the first time that a man had tried to assault her, she swung the waste bucket and got slop all over him.
Yes.
Are you stupid or just lazy? The satrap demanded loudly. Malta looked up at him with a jolt. Her thoughts had carried her far. I'm sorry, she said, and tried to make her voice sincere. I said, I'm bored. Not even the food is interesting. No wine. No smoke, save at a table with the captain. Can you read? At her puzzled nod, he directed her. Go and see if the captain has any books. You could read to me. Her mouth went dry. I don't read Chalcedean. You are too ignorant for words. I do. Go borrow a book for me. She tried to keep fear from her voice. But I don't speak Chalcedean. How will I ask for one? He snorted in disgust. How can parents let their children grow up in such ignorance? Does not Bingtown border on Chalced? One would think you would at least learn your neighbor's tongue. So damnably provincial. No wonder Bingtown cannot get along with them. He sighed heavily, a man wronged. Well, I cannot fetch it myself with my skin peeling like this. Can you remember a few words? Knock on his door, kneel down and abase yourself, then say, La ni rake je loyen. He rattled the syllables off in a breath. Malta could not even tell where one word began and another left off. La ni rake en, she tried. No, stupid. La ni rake je loyen. Oh, and add recall at the end, so he doesn't think you are rude. Hurry now, before you forget it. Honestly, that's kind of true of the satrap there. Learn your neighbor's tongue.
Yeah, why not? Why wouldn't you? I don't understand. It's not like you hate each other or something.
But they don't know each other's languages. How are they going to learn to not hate each other?
Okay, well, I don't think Chalcedeans necessarily deserve to not be hated.
Wow, xenophobic there. A whole nation.
Okay. Well, I don't know that we see very many good Chalcedeans over the course of this series.
Yeah, not many. Not many. That's true.
But anyway, she probably should know more, especially because her dad's Chalcedean.
Right.
You would think that he would have even taught them basics like the word for book or something. I don't know.
Kyle wasn't much of a teacher, it doesn't seem like.
Yeah, fair enough. But I don't know. You would think that like his parents would be alive, right? Surely they speak Chalcedean at home or something when they want to.
He's half Chalcedean, right?
I don't know.
Can't remember, but I thought that was mentioned somewhere. But yeah, you would think one of them would have.
Like somebody would have passed on the tradition. I don't know. Whatever. Whatever the case is, Malta doesn't know. And it also could just be that she doesn't want to go, and so she's trying any excuse to not have to.
Well,
but
both.
Yeah,
yes.
But she actually really doesn't know in this case. She does mention that she is terrified, but she is not going to beg to stay because that would mean that the satrap would ask her why.
Mm-hmm.
And then she would have to tell him, and she's not going to give him that weapon. So she decides to go, and as she's leaving, she tells herself she'll have a book on the way back. And so she can use that in defense. And hopefully, if she's going to the captain's quarters, nobody will bother her on the way there.
And they don't. The men still hoot and click their teeth, and that terrifies her, but she keeps her eyes down, repeats the syllables to herself, eventually gets to the door and knocks. She hears a response, obviously doesn't understand it, peeks in, and the captain was stretched out on his bunk. He leaned up on one elbow to stare at her angrily. She says the words, then abruptly recalling the satrap's other instructions, she's dropped to her knees and bent her head low. Recall, she added belatedly. He said something to her. She dared lift her eyes to him. He had not moved. He stared at her, then repeated the same words more loudly. She looked at the floor and shook her head, praying he would know she did not understand. He got to his feet and she braced herself. She darted a glance up at him. He pointed at the door. She scrabbled toward it, backed out of it, came to her feet, bowed low again, and shut it. The moment she was outside the cabin, the catcalls and teeth clicking resumed. The other end of the boat seemed impossibly far away. She would never get there safely. Hugging her arms tightly around herself, Malta ran. She was nearly at the end of the rowing benches when someone reached up and snatched hold of her ankle. She fell heavily, striking her forehead, elbows, and knees on the rough planking. For an instant she was stunned. Dazed, she rolled to her back and looked up at a laughing young man standing over her. He was handsome, tall, and blond, like her father, with honest blue eyes and a ready grin. He cocked his head and said something to her. A query? I'm all right, she replied. He smiled at her. Her relief was so great she almost smiled back at him. Then he reached down and flung up the front of her skirts. He went down on one knee, his hands busy at his belt. So she tries to scrabble away. She yells no, and as he exposes himself, she remembers Kekki's instructions and yells, I'm bleeding. He looked startled, and she pushed her hair back from her face. He recoiled suddenly in horror, uttering an exclamation of disgust. She did not care. It had worked. She jerked away from him, managed to stand, and raced the last few strides to shelter, flung herself through the door flap, and collapsed on the floor. Her breath sobbed in and out of her. Her elbows stung. She blinked something wet from her eye, then wiped at it. Blood. The fall had opened her scar again.
Yeah, and as she is dealing with that horrible incident that just happened to her, the satrap is angrily asking, "Where's my book?"
And then just when she replies, I don't think he has any, he just pointed to the door. The satrap's like, ugh, how annoying. Well, just rub my feet. Maybe I'll doze off.
Right. So, and then Malta has to go try to start rubbing his feet. Like, her life has really taken a downward turn. It is horrendous, the conditions she is living through.
Mm-hmm.
And she's doing it. She has to survive. So she goes to rub his feet, but he is disgusted because of her bleeding head.
What is the matter with you? What is that? I fell. I opened the cut again. She lifted her hand to touch it gingerly. Her fingers came away sticky with blood and a thick white pus. Malta stared at it in horror. She picked up one of Kekki's rags and dabbed at her brow. It did not hurt much, but more of the stuff soaked the rag. Malta began to shake as she looked at it. What was it? What did it mean? She let her fingers walk the scar, and she hasn't done that since she's gotten it, really. The scar felt knobby, ridged, and gristly like the end of a chicken bone. A shudder ran over her. She wanted to vomit. She lifted her face to the satrap. What does it look like? She demanded quietly. He did not seem to hear her. Don't touch me. Go clean yourself and bind something across that. Pfft! I cannot look at that. Get away. So she's bleeding a lot from her forehead, and there's also a white pus there, and her scar felt knobby because it's not just a scar, it's the red crest. She's changed from the dragon's touch.
Yes. Which we know, but she does not.
And that's also why the sailor was disgusted when she pushed her hair back from her forehead.
Right.
There's a very, very horrifying cut on her head that looks like,
It's protruding something.
yeah, something's happening that's not natural in a injury.
Yes. And with this, she goes over to Kekki to try to get some solace in her ally and realizes that Kekki has died.
Mm-hmm. Everything bad is happening all at once, and just right then, a sailor shouts something, and the satrap sits up suddenly and says, "The ship! They're hailing the ship! Perhaps now there will be decent food and wine. Malta, fetch my... Oh, now what ails you?" His gaze lowers to Kiki's corpse. He sighed. "She's dead, isn't she?" He shook his head sadly. What a nuisance.
He is really awful. He is a horrible, horrible person.
Mm-hmm.
I'll put him up there with Kyle. He's definitely worse than Kyle, but
Oh yeah, definitely worse than Kyle. Yeah, not great. Malta has had a very rough go of it. And it's just going from bad to worse, really.
yeah, her only ally is dead. She was just assaulted and, had to fend off by herself. And as she's trying to figure out what's happening to her because she's bleeding profusely.
Doesn't know if she's going to die from it.
Yeah, doesn't know she's potentially on the brink of death. She also has to deal with the satrap who is rude to her, making her rub his feet, treating her as a servant. What do you do? There's not really a good answer.
Survive, I guess. Now we switch over to Serilla. As I mentioned, there's a lot of point of view shifts in this chapter. This chapter and the next chapter, things start to happen.
Yes.
Things are really picking up in this book.
Ball is rolling.
Yeah. So Serilla is waiting for her lunch to be brought to her in the library. She sat awaiting it with an anticipation that had nothing to do with hunger. So she's annoyed that the tattoo serving woman was starting to do things with a perfect courtesy because she's waiting for a potential note.
Yes.
And we are picking this up in media res because the last we heard, she was just talking to Road Karen, and that's about it.
Right. Road had proposed and had kind of made it clear that he thought he was in charge.
Mm-hmm. And now in this part of the story, we learn that he kind of is in charge. There's not much stopping him from doing what he wants and saying it's in Serilla's name.
Exactly. And people believe that he's telling the truth.
Mm-hmm. But she's waiting for a note because she had a previous note in a dinner or a lunch with Bingtown council heads from Mingsley.
Yes.
It was just in her napkin. And so she's very disappointed to find that there is no note this time. But she thinks back on that lunch and that note, and we get to learn all about it.
Right. She does mention that she is worried because she replied to the note. She placed the note where she was told, the reply to the note where she was told, and it was gone a few hours later. So obviously somebody had picked it up. But she's worried that it was actually a trap from Road trying to test her loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
And so she is really anxious to see if Mingsley is going to call again.
Yeah, so Serilla is saying that things have gotten worse with Road Karen now. Road suspected everything and everyone. He had discovered the power of cruelty, and it was corrupting him swiftly. He could not keep a secret, yet accused everyone around him of being the source of the rumors that plagued and terrorized Bingtown. He bragged to her of what had happened to those who spoke out against him, though he never admitted to having a direct hand in any of it. Zwickers had a good beating for his insolence. Justice has been done. Perhaps he had intended that such talk would keep her bound to him. It had had the reversed effect. She had felt so chilled and sickened that she was now willing to risk everything to break free of him. When the first note had come from Mingsley offering an alliance, she had been shocked at his boldness. It had slipped out of her napkin onto her lap while she was dining with the heads of the Bingtown Council. But if one of them had been instrumental in delivering the note, she saw no sign of it. It must have been one of the servants. Servants were easily bribed to such tasks. These little asides just still remind me that Serilla is so elite and out of touch with things.
Rich, out of touch girl.
Mm-hmm. So we learned that Serilla is fearing that her response to the letter, if it wasn't a test from Road and it actually had gone back to Mingsley, was maybe a little bit too tame and too measured, because Mingsley's note had a blunt proposition and kind of laid things out on the table for her. Serilla was almost too stunned to keep, to follow along with the conversation during that lunch when she first got the note, because it was so, so in her face with everything.
He minced no words in revealing that traitorous new traders had intended to seize the satrap from Davad's house, and even that they had received support from nobles in Jamalia and Chalcedean mercenaries in their pay. But the plan had soured. The Chalcedeans who had raided Bingtown had betrayed the alliance for the sake of a quick plunder. The Jamalian nobles who had backed them were plunged into civil unrest of their own. Some traitorous fools claimed the Jamalian conspirators could raise a fleet to aid them and enforce their control of Bingtown. Mingsley believed it unlikely. The traditionalists in Jamalia City were more powerful than the conspirators had believed. The conspiracy had failed miserably both in Bingtown and Jamalia thanks to her intervention. All had heard how she had boldly snatched the satrap. Rumor suggested that the satrap was now under the safe wing of the Vestrit family. So now we know for sure that there actually was conspiracy, and it did involve the nobles in Jamalia.
And Chalcedean, mercenaries.
Yes. So there was a plot happening. Serilla was correct about it happening. She just wasn't correct about who was involved.
Mingsley went on to declare that he and the other honest new traders were most anxious to clear their own names and salvage their investments in Bingtown. Her bold declaration that Davad Restart was innocent of treachery against the satrapy of Jamalia had heartened them. Simple logic showed that if Davad were innocent, then so were his former trading partners. These honest but misjudged new traders were most anxious to negotiate a peace with the Bingtown traders and to establish their clear loyalty to the satrapy. He then stated his bargain. The loyalist new traders wanted Serilla to intercede for them with the Bingtown Council, but first she must divest herself of the hot-headed, bloody-handed Road Cairn. Only then would they treat with her. In return for this sacrifice, Mingsley and the other loyal new traders would furnish her with a list of those new traders who had plotted against the satrap. The list would include the names of highly placed Jamalian conspirators, as well as the Chalcedean lords who had been involved. He not so subtly pointed out that such a list, kept secret, was worth a great deal of coin. A woman possessing such information could live well and independently the rest of her life, whether she chose to remain in Bingtown or return to Jamalia. Someone had informed Mingsley very well about her. So we have a very interesting source of information here that we haven't really gotten before. I talked about a couple episodes ago, lamenting the fact that we didn't really get much about the new traders.
Right.
More so, I was talking about the 3 ships during that time. But the new traders, too, we didn't have a ton of information on and what was going on with the politics of them.
Yeah, it's really interesting to get their point of view, even though that we know that this is obviously skewed and putting Mingsley in a better light than he probably should be. But it is something that, or it is a perspective that we haven't had, and one that probably people aren't really thinking about while reading the books, where you're not like, I wonder how they're doing or what they're up to. I mean, maybe passingly, but not like in depth. And so now we get to see that a lot of the new traders are jumping ship from the old plan. There was a plan. They're jumping ship from that plan. They want things to go back to normal. They don't want war anymore. This is scary and dangerous.
So Serilla is using her knowledge of the old satrap, of what she learned from him, and kind of viewing this without any passion and just looking at the bare information and the posturing. So she can kind of deduce that Mingsley had been involved with the plot to take the satrap initially. His intimate knowledge betrayed him, but the tide had turned against him, and now he wished to change his alliance. If she could, she would help him. It could only benefit her, especially as she was in the midst of doing the same thing. She would use Mingsley's cooperation as her passage to establish credibility with Ronica Vestrit and other like-thinking members of the Bingtown Council. She wished now that Ronica Vestrit was still in her house. she thinks about all the things that have transpired, and she's glad that Ronica ran, but she could really use Ronica close by now to help shift opinion of her. And she could, if she chose, be like Mingsley, reordering all she had done to put herself in a better light later on.
Right. And remind Ronica, or let Ronica know who had helped her escape from Road.
Yes. So Serilla is thinking more shrewdly now.
Yeah.
And yes, she's still not like a great person in any of this, because all she's thinking about is like how to manipulate her way to a better position, right? But at least she's not actively detrimental to Bingtown.
Yeah.
Her reputation is used actively detrimentally with Road.
Yeah. It's unfortunate because it does feel a little too late. She kind of is too far in the sauce with Road, and that's of her own doing. But she does mention that her standing up to Road by warning Ronica was the little bit of kick that she needed to gain courage to leave the situation.
Yeah.
And it is important to remember that she is, going through a lot right now. And so obviously she's making bad choices, but that doesn't absolve her from the outcome of her bad choices.
Mm-hmm.
And she's once again trying to run away from those problems and thinking maybe this new solution will fix all of her problems. And all she has to do is just word it correctly, because those silly Bingtown people will never know the difference.
Right. And she's, very tempted by Mingsley's offer, because that list could set her up as an independent woman. She doesn't have to be the Satrap's companion.
Right.
She could look to a different future. It doesn't have to be holding her back.
Yeah. And she talks about how in this moment, the reason she wants Ronica Vestrit is because Ronica has a talent of sorting through things like this. And she would be a good ally to have to think of the best way to make a deal.
Mm-hmm.
So much was based on what Mingsley knew or suspected. Ronica had a gift for sorting out such things, and a gift for making her think. And then she goes on to talk about how Ronica's assertion that her past doesn't have to trap her. She doesn't have to be trapped by what happened to her. She can grow from that. She's now looking
at her whole life rather than just the assault.
Exactly. So not just the assault that happened, but her life as a companion, and how maybe that can just inform who she is going forward, not necessarily define it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a little bit of a check-in with Serilla, and we get her point of view, which is very important because we switch over to Reyn, and then we'll switch over to Keffria, and we get more information from that Ronica side of Bingtown.
Yes.
And see all of these events through that side rather than from Serilla's point of view.
Exactly. Because obviously, I think everybody in their own way is an unreliable narrator, but Serilla more so in this situation, because she doesn't really seem to grasp all of the severity of what's happening, I guess.
Because she's information locked. Remember, Road gets all the communications.
Exactly. So I think that's one thing to me that I always have to remind myself of, is that there's definitely some stuff missing from her point of view.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're in Reyn's room right now. He's getting ready, and Greg's like, I hate to rush you, but people are waiting and they're ready.
And last time Greg and Reyn were together in this room, it was getting ready for the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the last time that they saw each other.
Yeah.
So
Greg hasn't had a time to say, I'm sorry for what happened.
Yeah.
Never meant for anyone to get injured or anything like that. It sucks.
I'm sorry about Malta getting injured. And, he takes his time to apologize for that. And Reyn, in his sad boy era, says, it doesn't really matter now that she got hurt.
And he says, well, I can't talk about it. And Greg's like, well, you'll have to, because your tie with Malta has brought this down on you. The rumor around town is either that she kidnapped the satrap from where the Rainwild traders were holding him, or that she aided his escape. Road Karen has been noising it about that she has probably turned him over to the Chalcedeans because she is Chalcedean herself. And shut up! Reyn drew in a deep breath. A moment, please. I'm sorry, Greg apologized again. Reyn sighed. No, I should apologize. You don't know. You can't know everything I've been through. I'm surprised that you've heard anything at all. Listen, Malta is dead. The Satrap is dead. A strange laugh bubbled up in him. I should be dead. I feel I am dead. But no, listen. Malta went into the buried city for my sake. There was a dragon there. The dragon was between lives, in a coffin or a cocoon type of thing. I don't know what to call it. The dragon has been tormenting me, invading my dreams, twisting my thoughts. Malta knew, and she wanted to make it stop. A dragon? Greg's voice was questioning of both the word and Reyn's sanity. I know it's a wild tale. Don't ask me questions and don't look skeptical. Just listen. We recounts the tale to Greg.
And he also says, you know, if you still don't believe me about the dragon, you can ask the Kendry because he saw the dragon as well, and it changed him. He's been morose since then, constantly seeking his captain's approval and closeness. We have been concerned for him.
Yeah.
So that's also something that has happened. But yeah, this is stuff that the people in Bingtown don't know. They've just heard that Malta was seen as a satrap and on the Reyn Wild River.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not looking good. But yeah, here we have Reyn saying that, no, they're dead.
Yeah.
Because
I looked from on the river, saw no sign.
I also find it really interesting that in Reyn's mind, Malta solely went down to the dragon to help him, to ease his pain from the dragon's torment, which was not the case. I mean
kinda.
She did help Reyn. She did make that part of her bargain, but
Right.
she also went to the dragon to free her, to help her father.
Yeah, that was her main idea.
Yeah, like she inadvertently also helped Reyn, but like that wasn't all of it.
So Greg is shuddering. He's like, man, yeah, you're right. We don't know any of this. All we've heard are conflicting rumors. We heard that the satrap is missing or dead in the quake. Then a rumor started that the Vestrits had stolen him to sell him to the Chalcedeans or let the new traders kill him. Ronica Vestrit has been hiding here with us. Karen has put it about that she must be captured and held. At any other time, we would have urged Ronica to go to the council and demand that they hear her, but lately there have been some ugly reprisals against folk that Road Karen has accused of being traitors. I don't know why the companion trusts him so. It's dividing the Bingtown council, for some say we must listen to her as the satrap's representative, while my father and I feel it is time Bingtown kept its own council. Road has been saying that the Vestrits plotted with the Chalcedeans. He says that maybe pirates never took their live ship, but hints that Kyle Haven has been part of his conspiracy. That maybe he took Vivacia up the Reyn Wild River to pick up the satrap in Malta. Well, too many of us know the lie of that, so he changed his tune and said it didn't have to be a live ship. Maybe it was a Chalcedean ship. Road's a fool, broken Reyn. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Reyn talks about how all of the ships eventually get eaten through.
Right.
No matter what they try in their hulls.
Which okay, so this part really is frustrating that there's not like a hint of like, I guess maybe a ship could have found them because they were pretty far down the river, I assume. So it's not like the Chalcedean ships had to go that far into the Reyn Wild River to get them.
Right.
I mean, it still took a day or two to leave the river, but they weren't at Treyhog. So for him to be like, oh, they've never been able to make it all the way up to Treyhog. Their boats always collapse or whatever. Well, they didn't have to make it all the way up to Treyhog. They just had to make it to Malta. Mm-hmm. So the fact that that's not even on the radar is a little frustrating to me. But also, I think it's frustrating because we know that she is picked up by the Chalcedeans and that she's still alive, and so is the Satrap. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
The Road's a fool. You have more faith in our patrols than I do, Greg grimaces, because Reyn's like, well, they'll either, be watched by, seen by live ships or get eaten by the river. So no, obviously Road's a fool. That didn't happen.
Right.
And Greg's like, well, you have more faith in them than I do. There's been an onslaught of Chalcedean ships. We chased them out of the harbor, and while we are gone, another wave comes in. I'm surprised you got past them as easily as you did. You're right, I suppose. When the Kendry came out of the river mouth, there were no other live ships about. Which, again, hints that something's a little off there.
Right. And you think, again, would be like, okay, so maybe it is possible she's alive, but she would have been captured. She's not in, like, this wasn't a conspiracy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, even just a little bit of thought towards that. But he also is like so willing to believe she's dead all the time and refuses to accept that there's any hope she's not unless he sees it with his own eyes.
Melodramatic.
Yes.
One Chalcedean ship seemed interested in us last night, but Kendry soon left it behind. Greg, after a little bit of silence, says, "There's so much happening. I can't grasp it all. A dragon? Somehow it is easier to believe in a dragon than to believe Malta is dead. When I think of her, I can only see her as she looked that night in your arms on the dance floor." Reyn closed his eyes. A small white upturned face stared at him from a tiny boat shooting down the river. "I envy you that," he said quietly. So yeah, Reyn is still blaming himself desperately for everything bad that has happened to Malta here. And we switch over to Keffria.
Yeah. And Keffria is not having the best time.
Everyone in this chapter is just not having the best time.
Yeah, no, everybody is in the thick of it. They're going through it.
Mm-hmm.
But at this moment, Keffria is getting increasingly frustrated because she's trying to figure out what to do. She's going through depression and sorrow and despair at the loss of her daughter, along with her husband and son. And she's expected to make decisions and to care about politics, which is really hard for her.
And Ronica is the one preaching about politics and giving her a lecture on what's happening.
Right. And Keffria on a good day isn't one to care about politics.
Right.
So it's even worse now when she kind of thinks, who cares about anything? I don't need to care about anything anymore. My daughter's dead.
So Ronica is saying to Keffria that she has the Liveship trader vote. She is the trader of the family. So you have to go before the Bingtown Council and plead your case. You would have to be the one to present our view there. The Bingtown Council would not let me speak on the matter of Devad's death. They will surely refuse to hear me on this. Nevertheless, I will stand by you while you speak and accept the consequences. And what would I say? Keffria demanded wearily. If I tell them that I don't know what became of Malta, let alone the Satrap, it sounds like a deception. You have one other alternative. You and Selden can flee Bingtown. You might be left at peace in Inglesby for a time, unless someone decided to win favor with Serilla and Cairn by hunting you down there. Bingtown is not like that. It won't come to that. She waited for someone to agree, but no one spoke. Too much was happening too fast. Keffria is just reflecting that they had left her, they had given her some time to bathe and change, but then Ronica had come in and lectured her on stuff, and then she had a little bit of time when Ronica went to talk to Jani, but now she's at a table surrounded by other people, and they're talking politics and things to do and going to the Bingtown Council and all these different happenings, and Keffria is just spinning in her head with what is actually going on.
Right. She wants time to grieve and hole up and not have to worry about other things.
And she did have a moment, I will say, she did have a moment with Ronica where they
Yes.
both grieved for Malta, and Keffria says that did repair a lot of the rift between them.
Yes.
But whereas Keffria wanted to huddle somewhere until this incomprehensible pain passed, her mother insisted that they go on living. For her, that meant fighting as well, fighting for Bingtown and Selden's future. Yeah, Keffria is getting prodded along by the
Yes.
by the matriarch of the family.
Which is fair. It is hard to walk through grief, especially the grief of losing a child, I'm sure. I
Yeah.
wouldn't know personally what that feels like, but I'm sure that is a large amount of grief to surpass. Although we do know Ronica does know the pain and has
Yes.
been there before.
Mm-hmm.
And not just the pain of losing a child, but also her husband.
Mm-hmm.
And so she is a good person to be there to comfort Keffria, but also Ronica and Keffria are two very different people. So the way that
Yes.
Keffria deals with sorrow and loss is very different from how Ronica does. And Keffria just doesn't care. She doesn't care what happened in Bingtown when she left. Ronica gives her the lowdown and tells her that the Bingtown council's ability to rule has broken down. Karen and a handful of young traders are terrorizing families that did not agree with his ideas. And there's a need to create a new governing body for Bingtown, one that encompassed all the folks who lived there. A lecture on politics was the last thing Keffria wanted or needed just now. She had nodded numbly, repeatedly, until Ronica had departed to confer with Jani Kupris. So she's really just falling back into old habits of, why is this my problem? You all figure it out. I don't know anything. I don't need to know anything. Like, I'll just nod along. I'm not adding anything to this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really enough anymore. Like, this is too dire of a situation to just be, away.
Right. Yeah.
So they're, getting dire.
Yeah. So after she had descended and are sitting around this table with Selden next to her, she's looking around at all these people, and it's an odd mix of people. There are some traders that she recognizes, at least from 6 different families. And there's also 2 women and a man with tattooed faces. And beside them sat 4 folk who, by their garb, were 3 ships' immigrants. Reyn and Jani Kupris came next, and completing the circle were the 3 remaining Vestrits. Keffria found herself at Naria Tanira's left hand. The trader woman had insisted that Selden be seated at the table and admonished the boy to pay great attention. This is your future unfolding, lad. You've a right to witness how it comes into being. Initially, Keffria had thought that Naria was trying to include the boy and reassure him he was still important. Since they had left Trehog, Selden had grown clingy and withdrawn. He seemed a much younger child than the boy who had swiftly adapted to the treetop city. Now she wondered if Trader Tanira's words were not prophetic. Selden sat listening to it all with rare concentration. Keffria looked at her young son as she conceded, I am too tired to run anymore. We have to face whatever comes. So she's kind of agreeing with Ronica in the early part of this section to talk to the Bingtown Council.
Right.
And Naria is like, you need to do more than face it. You need to challenge it. Half of Bingtown is so busy huddling in the ruins that they don't perceive the power that Serilla and her toady Karen have seized. So I have a couple of phrases highlighted in this section.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, it's about Serilla and the perception of her, because the perception of her is that she is the one in control still.
Yeah.
Because Karen perpetuates that. It benefits him to believe that she's the one in control and he is just aiding her in all of her wishes.
He's acting in her wishes.
Yeah, which is why Greg is like, why does she cling to this guy still? And why the new traders are like, why does she cling to this guy still? Because they see some of her actions and she has some following by just having the satrap's authority, right? But if you have somebody who is a bully and using power to hurt people, and Trader Dwicker died from his injuries, even killed people for having dissenting opinions, you're going to have a divisive rule here.
Yeah, and also that person is doing all that in your name.
Right.
With your authority, even if you didn't give it. So her not standing up and saying to the council, no, Road doesn't have power, she's allowing him to get away with it. She's playing along with it. And she doesn't even know for the most part, but she has set up this stage for Road to be able to play on.
And now we learn why Dwicker was beat up, because from Serilla's point of view, it's just that Dwicker had
a disagreement.
Yeah, exactly. But we learn that Dwicker called a meeting and had heard a rumor that Serilla was treating with the new traders and trying to create a truce without going through the council. And Karen stood up and denied it on her behalf. That was when we saw how close they had become. Dwicker was found later so badly beaten that he had never spoke again before he died. Another council head had his barn set on fire. New traders or slaves were blamed both times, but there are other darker rumors about town.
Right, and that's just from the old trader's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Because then one of the slaves speaks up to say, you hear how it affects Bingtown traders.
Well, we should say one of the tattooed, but from Keffria's point of view, she says a slave spoke up.
Right, it's one of the tattooed.
Yeah, which is a interesting perspective because a lot of our main characters or point of view characters have had realizations about slaves are people too.
Right.
You know?
Keffria has not.
Not yet. Yeah. Anyways.
But yeah, so a tattooed person has spoken up and says, "You hear how it affects Bingtown traders. Worse things have been done to tattooed families. Folk have been beaten simply for going out to barter or buy food. Families have been burned out. We are blamed for every crime in Bingtown and given no chance to prove innocence. Cairn and his cohorts are known and feared by all. New trader families who are less able to defend themselves have been attacked in their homes. Fires are set in the night, and fleeing folk, even children, are ambushed. A cowardly, sneaky way to wage a war. We have no love for the new traders who enslaved us, but neither do we wish to be a party to the slaughter of children." She met the eyes of the traders at the table. "If Bingtown cannot bring Cairn and his thugs under control soon, you will lose all opportunity to ally with the tattooed." And the rumors that we hear are that the Bingtown Council supports Cairn, that once the Bingtown traders are in full command of the town, we will be shipped out with the new traders, driven forth from Bingtown and back into slavery. So things are bad everywhere, not just for the Bingtown traders, and it's actually worse for the non-traders.
Yeah.
Especially the tattooed and new traders.
Ronica shakes her head here and is like, we're just repeating rumors. That's like all we hear now in Bingtown. It's awful. The latest rumor is that Serilla has appointed Road as the head of the new Bingtown Guard and that he has called a secret meeting with the remaining leaders of the Bingtown Traders Council tonight. If we reach consensus today, we will all be there to put an end to such nonsense and an end to Cairn's brutality. When have secret meetings ever been a part of Bingtown's government? I do want to take a note of what the tattooed person said, and yes, it's all true, but I think a big thing that's called out later is that these people, the three ships, the tattooed, the new traders, they want equality in the town, but they still look to Bingtown traders to fix Bingtown trader stuff.
Right.
Because the tattooed person calls out, says like, hey, if you don't fix this issue, you're going to lose us as allies.
Right.
Like, okay, we'll do it together. Don't, all of this is about equality here, right? We're all trying to fix each other's issues and problems. So there's still, it's not just the Bingtown traders who are being stubborn in their ways and their set mindsets, because everyone has to change to accept a new status quo.
Yeah. And it's easy to fall back into habits without realizing by saying, this is your problem, you fix it. And then needing to be brought to the attention of, no, it's all of our problem now because we're all equal. We're all on the same footing.
Yeah.
But likewise, when Ronica says, when has secrecy ever been something that we have stood for, she is rightfully called out by a three ships trader man who we know is
Sparse Kelter.
Sparse Kelter, yes, thank you. And Sparse mentions it's always been your way to be secretive and that this isn't new. I mean, maybe to you guys, you're not used to being left out of the table, but everybody else here is.
And Keffria is like, well, that's the way it always is. Trader business.
Yeah, traders take care of trader business. And then Sparse Kelter points out, yeah, except you think trader business is literally everything running this town, everything that even affects us. And therefore, we don't get a say in how our city is managed.
If you want us on your side, then it has to be by your side, not outside a wall, nor on a leash. She stared at him, uncomprehending. A deep unrest was building in her. Bingtown, as she had known it, was being dismantled, and the folk in this room seemed intent on speeding the process along. Had her mother and Jani Kupris gone mad? Would they save Bingtown by destroying it? Were they seriously considering sharing power with former slaves and fishermen? Jani Kupris spoke quietly. I know my friend Ronica Vestrit shares your feelings. She has told me that the folk of Bingtown with similar goals must ally regardless of whether they are traitor or not. With great respect for those here and for the opinions of dear friends, I do not know if that is possible. The bonds between Bingtown traders and the Rainwild traders are old and secured with blood. How can we offer that loyalty to others? Can we demand it in return? Are your groups willing to forge that strong a bond and abide by it as we have, not just binding ourselves, but binding our children's children's children? That depends, Sparse Kelter. That was the bearded man's name, Keffria suddenly recalled. He glanced at the slaves at the table as if this was something they had already discussed. We would make demands in return for our loyalty. I may as well lay them on the table now. They're simple, and you folks can say yay or nay. If the answer is nay, there's no sense my wasting a tide's fishing here. Keffria was suddenly reminded of her own father and his reluctance to waste time on mincing words. So Sparse Kelter says, I want land for everybody.
Right.
And not just, a shred of beach, but land. And then he looks around and the tattooed woman speaks up, and the tattooed woman says, no slavery. Let Bingtown become a place of slaves can flee to and not fear being turned back to their masters. No slavery and land for those of us who are already here. The woman hesitated, then surged on determinedly. And each family gets a vote in the Bingtown Council. Council votes have always gone with land ownership, Neria Tanira pointed out. But where did that bring us? To here, to this mess. When the new traders claimed votes based on land they'd purchased from financially wounded traders, we were foolish enough to grant them. If it hadn't been for the Traders' Council, they'd be running Bingtown already. Devochet's deep voice somehow kept his words from sounding offensive. We kept the Bingtown Traders' Council separate before, Keffria offered. These people were swaying her, but something she felt must be held back for Selden. She could not stand by and let being a Bingtown trader become merely an empty title. Could not we do that again? Have one council where all landowners vote, and a separate one for the Bingtown traders only? Kekki speaks up now and says, do that, and we all know where the true power would remain. No leashes, a fair say in Bingtown. There's a back and forth here. I covered a lot in that passage, and it starts out with the Rainwell traders saying, I don't know if you guys know what you're getting into.
Right.
I don't know if you can vouch for 5 generations in the future when they're still bound by our words here.
Right. Because that's the way of the old traders. That's what we've always done, but you guys are new. And would you be willing to live by that? To teach your children that they have to honor this and have them teach their children the same.
And before even asking what that is, Sparse Kelter, the 3 ships, and the Tattooed are like, you guys have to abide by the stuff that we demand too, though.
Right.
So if you're not even going to agree to that, I won't even want to hear what you're going to offer or what I have to agree to. So give us land, give us votes, let us run this city that we're living in.
Yeah.
And
no more slavery.
No more slavery ever. Which technically was a law in Bingtown.
Right.
But kind of just like a suggestion.
Yeah, and it seemed like a gray area of like...
Because indentured servants were a thing.
Yes, and like you could return slaves to their masters, it seems like. Or like that was a general practice.
Yeah, it's just kind of ignored.
Yeah, not great. So actually this time on the books, no slavery, and we're living by it. But yeah, I think they're pretty fair asks for everybody involved. Just asking to be given a say in the place that they live and land ownership.
For us, it's definitely very, very fair asks, right?
Yeah.
For them, it is a complete change of government.
Yeah.
And a complete change of power share. And a complete change of the way of living for these people that they're asking to agree with.
That's true. And I mean, especially with Keffria here saying, she doesn't want Selden's legacy to be just a title and nothing else. And so that's part of her fear of pushing back because it means something to be an old trader. And if they agree to all this, it doesn't anymore.
Yeah.
And which I find a little bit silly because obviously an old trader would still have live ships where other families don't. Because there's no more wizard wood. And maybe they don't know that. Maybe that's not been made clear to them that there could never be any more. But it's just funny, the idea of like having a live ship when other families don't isn't enough. He still needs a special title of having power, more power than others.
Right.
and she'd be giving that up for him, which I guess is like a parent's job, right? You don't want to give your kid less than you had.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just like funny to try to say like, oh, it'd be awful if he'd have nothing. Nothing would make him special.
We've heard what you ask, but not what you offer, another trader spoke. Keffria admired the way he had sidestepped Kelter's observation, but at the same time she wondered what they were doing. What was the sense of asking any of these questions? No one here had the power to make a binding decision. We offer honest hands and strong backs and knowledge, and we ask the same. Let us stand on an equal footing with you to share the work of rebuilding Bingtown. We offer to help defend her, not just from pirates and Chalcedeans, but from Jamalia itself if need be. Or do you think the Pearl Throne will let you slip its leash and speak not a word to rebuke you? The full realization of what they were discussing suddenly settled on Keffria. We are talking about separating Bingtown completely from Jamalia? About standing on our own alone between Jamalia and Chalced? Why not? Devochet demanded. The idea has been broached before, Trader Vestrit. Your own father often spoke of it privately. We will not have a better chance than this. For better or worse, the satrap has perished. And he kind of discusses that everything's going to be in civil unrest. So now is the best time to declare your independence so they can't focus on you immediately.
Right.
So their immediate enemies, after they settle their Bingtown differences, will be Chalced. And then eventually maybe Jamalia.
Right. It is a good plan, and it does make sense timing-wise.
So he says, why not break free now and make Bingtown a place where all folk begin anew, all men standing on an equal footing? And all women, too. Kekki speaks up. Devochet looked at her in surprise. It was but a manner of speaking, Kekki. A manner of speaking becomes a manner of thinking. I am not here simply as sparse Kelter's daughter. I've a boat and nets of my own. If this alliance comes to pass, I'll want land of my own. 3 ships folk know that what a person has for a mind is more important than what is between their legs. 3 ships women will not give up our place alongside our men simply to say we are part of Bingtown now. That, too, must be understood. That is only common sense, Greg Tanira asserted smoothly. He smiled warmly at the 3 ships women as he added, Look about this table and see who speaks here. Bingtown has a long tradition of strong women. Some of the strongest are seated here today. That tradition will not change. Kekki Kelter leaned back in her chair. She returned Greg's smile easily. I just wanted to hear those words spoken aloud here, she confirmed. She nodded to Greg, and for an instant Keffria wondered if there was an understanding between them. Had Kekki spoken her piece knowing that Greg Tanira would take her side? Did Greg Tanira count her, Keffria, as one of these strong women? But as swiftly as her interest had been piqued, it faltered. She took a breath and spoke her thoughts.
So before we get to her thoughts, are Kekki and Greg in a relationship at this point? Do we know?
No, they're not.
They're just friends.
Yeah.
Okay.
Getting there, though.
Yeah. But I do find it a little funny that the Bingtown people are like, oh, it's just a manner of speaking. Of course women will have equal rights. Like, see, look at the table. And it's Ronica Vestrit, who has been ostracized for being an independent woman. And like Jani, which I guess she speaks for
the richest family.
The richest family because her husband died.
She has another husband.
Yeah, but he's not from the original rich family, right?
Correct.
So I don't know. So there's that. And then I don't know. It's just funny to me to be like, yeah, of course, women are always allowed to be independent here. And historically, that is not the case. Think about Althea. She's ostracized for her choice not to be a traditional woman. And
historically, it was the case. Recent historically. It was
I guess. But even the people at this table would not necessarily be allowed to be independent. So it's just, I thought that was kind of a funny, like, the 2 men speaking of being like, well, of course women are equal. And Kekki being like, I just need you guys to say it out loud that you agree.
It was implied that Greg and Kekki worked out that conversation beforehand. So
yes. But I mean, in general.
Mm-hmm. So Keffria speaks her thoughts here and says, we talk of agreements, but none of us has the power to make these agreements binding. And Ronica contradicts her and says, we have as much power as anybody else. We're all just kind of struggling along here. we are not afraid to make decisions. Bingtown Council is.
Yeah.
So if we have all of our people who outnumber all the other ones agree to these things, we have the power to make Bingtown what we want.
Right. And not only that, but there are people that aren't here right now who are in agreement, who are letting us make these decisions.
Yeah.
So obviously we couldn't have everybody in one area because
Draws attention.
it draws too much attention. We needed to come together as the heads now to be able to go forward later tonight.
Those of us who were made slaves have an intimate knowledge of the new traders and their holdings. The new traders hope to hold what they have taken with folk they have tattooed. Once the tattooed are freed, will they fight for their masters? I doubt it. When the new traders are stripped of their slaves, their number is greatly reduced. Nor do they defend home and family as we do. Their homes and their legitimate families are in Jamalia. They have brought their mistresses and bastards to share the risks of living on the cursed shores, not their legitimate heirs. With Jamalia in a civil uproar, the new traders won't get help from that quarter. Many will rush back to Jamalia to defend ancestral holdings there. There are also the pirates to consider. Eventually, Jamalia may send an army against us to master us once more, but first it must make its way through the pirate isles. Well do I know, to my own sorrow, that is not an easy journey these days. Are you saying the new traders are no threat to Bingtown? Jani Cooperst asked incredulously. Ronica smiled bitterly. Less of a threat than some would have us believe. Our first danger comes from those within our town to seek to corrupt the traders and our ways. Tonight we will defeat them. After that, the real danger will come from the usual source, Chalced. Take care of us first, then it's Chalced, and then maybe Jamalia down the road, but they at least have the pirates to deal with before they can come here.
Right.
We should be, solid by then. And a trader speaks up and says, you're still talking about a single city-state standing against all of Chalced, and possibly Jamalia. We might hold them off for a while, but in the long run, they could starve us out. We've never been completely self-sufficient, and we must have markets for our trade goods. We must retain our bond with Jamalia, even if it means compromising with the new traders. Ronica agrees and says, as some of them leave, we will bring back trade agreements with them. We'll make some of those compromises. But no more tariff ministers, no more tariffs. And Keffria speaks up and says, not compromise with the new traders. Ally. She could scarcely believe it was herself speaking, yet she knew her words made sense. We should invite them to stand with us tonight when we break into Serilla's secret meeting with the council heads. She took a breath and crossed a line. Ask them boldly to break with Jamalia, stand with us, and take up our ways. If Bingtown is to be won, then we must be won today. Now. We should send word to that friend of Davad's. What was his name? Mingsley. He seemed to have sway with his fellows. A united Bingtown is our only hope against both Chalced and Jamalia. We have no other allies.
And I think this is really big and shows a lot of growth on Keffria's part. It does confuse me a little bit.
Shows that she has a brain.
Yeah, she does have a brain. She is capable of thinking. Once again, though, it's odd to me that every time Keffria has a good point and is like smart and standing up, it's always, she can hardly believe that it's her talking.
She has such low self-esteem about a woman's role. And even though she's like, oh, my mom is so strong and my sister is so wayward and so not proper, she can't see any of those roles for herself. I don't know. It's so weird.
So I don't know. I just think it's an interesting choice that both times now that she's spoken up in a meeting and asserted that she has power and brains, that she's like, oh my gosh, is it really me speaking? But it's always a good idea and it's well received. Mm-hmm. Like, she has a point. And I think it's huge that she started this conversation not caring about politics, not really understanding why they would destroy Bingtown as she knows it, to being like, hey, if we're going to do this, we can't just half do it. We need to fully commit and allow the new traders a chance to join in too. Like, they deserve a spot as much as everybody else.
Because Ronica was a little bit blinded by her hatred of the new traders still as an old trader. And her call for unity, I guess it in her mind included the new traders, but it was like with a truce.
Yeah, after everything else happened.
So Keffria speaking up and saying, no, if we're Bingtown, we're all Bingtown, is the right idea to carry on this idea forward and really get a new, fresh start that is solid ground for everyone to build something from.
Right.
But there's a silence there because Keffria does state we have no allies, so we need to ally with the new traders. They need to be part of Bingtown. There's a silence, and Selden speaks up and says, maybe the dragon would help us. All eyes turned to her son, sitting so straight on his chair. His eyes were wide open, but he looked at no one. The dragon could protect us from Jamalia and Chalced. An embarrassed silence fell. Reyn spoke at last, his voice heavy with emotion. The dragon cares nothing for us, Selden. She showed that when she let Malta perish. Forget her, or rather, remember her with contempt. What is this about a dragon? Sparse-Kelter demanded. Gently, Narya observed, young Selden has been through a great deal of late. The boy's jaw firmed. Don't doubt me. Do not doubt her. I have been carried in her claws and looked down on our world. Do you know how small we truly are? How pitiful are even our greatest works? I have felt her heart beating. When she touched me, I realized there was something beyond good and evil. She transcends. He stared, unseeing. In my dreams, I fly with her. A silence followed his words. The adults exchanged glances, some amused, some pitying, some annoyed at this interruption to their business. It stung Keffria to see her son treated so. Had not he been through enough? The dragon was real, Keffria declared. We all saw it. And I agree with Selden. The dragon may change everything. Her words shocked them, but the look Selden gave her was worth it. She could not recall the last time her son had looked at her with such shining eyes. Spar speaks up about the dragons that he saw, many years ago, the Buckkeep dragons.
Yes.
Six Duchies dragons.
He says he knows dragons are real because he's seen them before. Yeah. And then that old tale, someone muttered, and Sparse glowered at him. So it's funny because it is still kind of a tale on this side, even to traders. I guess they just weren't in that area at the time when the dragons were flying necessarily.
Yeah.
Interesting that Sparse-Kelter was, because that feels very far north for him to have been. Did the Three Ships people go trading like that up the...
Well, they were fishing. I don't remember what the story was. I think he said it somewhere in the books, but I forget what he said he was doing.
I saw some myself a few years back when sailing far to the north. They flew over like jewels winking in the sun, but Keep mustered them against the out-islanders.
Maybe he was making his own trading trip.
Just odd, because I felt like they're just fishermen. I don't know. I mean, not just, but they fish and then sell their fish in the markets. That's what I assumed, but I guess not. They also trade their goods.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe it was just a deep north fishing trip.
Could be.
A vacation.
Well, either way, people are like, oh, not again.
This dragon is the last of her kind. She hatched in the collapsing ruins of the Elderling city just before the swamp swallowed it. But she is no ally of ours. She is a treacherous and selfish creature. Keffria looked around the circle of faces. Disbelief loomed large. Pink-faced, Kelter suggested, perhaps we should return to discussing the new traders. Her father slapped the table with a broad palm. No. I can see now that I need the whole telling of what went on in the Reyn wilds. Long have we been kept ignorant of what is up that river. Let this be the first sign of openness from the Bingtown traders to their new allies. I want a full telling of this dragon tale and how Malta Vestrit and the Satrap perished. Heavy silence followed his words. Only the turning of their veiled heads revealed that Reyn and his mother conferred. All the other traders at the table kept the silence of their ancestors. It was a mistake, Keffria knew, but even knowing that, she could not change it. The Reyn wild must choose to reveal itself or remain hidden. Reyn leaned back. He crossed his arms on his chest. Very well, then, Sparse-Kelter declared heavily. He set his wide, work-reddened hands to the table and pushed his chair back to rise. Selden looks up at Keffria, gives her hand a quick squeeze, and then stands on his chair and says, It all began when I told Malta I knew a secret way to get into the Elderling city. It's my story as much as anyone's. Bingtown Trader and Rainwild Trader are my kin, and I was there. The look he gave Reyn defied him. She's my dragon as much as yours. You may have turned on her, but I have not. She saved our lives. It's time to share our secrets so we can all survive.
I do just want to pause.
8-year-old or 10-year-old.
I do want to pause here. He does have a point. It is his story to tell.
Yeah.
But also, I think it's really odd that the Rainwilders still have kept their secrets this whole time. Like, here we are meeting saying, let's all be equal. Let's create a thing. And they're just staying quiet. They asked, are you willing to pay the price generation after generation? And then refused to say what that price is. It refused to explain anything.
I don't understand the point of it either. I can understand like Reyn crossing his arms because he's angry at Tintaglia, right?
Right.
I can get that. But Jani is here to ask for aid.
And this is aid.
Yeah. And I really don't understand. Maybe they think that they can't speak for all of the Rainwild traders because she's just here on a diplomatic mission to get aid and not to reveal their secrets. And she's not technically like the head of the city at all.
Right. They have their own council.
Right. And I think she sits on it, but she's not like the leader. They have to do things diplomatically tho So maybe it's that reason.
But even so, I don't know. It just feels like an odd thing of like, why has there always been this secret of what's up there? Why does it matter, especially in this moment on the brink of societal collapse?
Yeah.
Why is the secret more important than the chance of survival?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess by Selden speaking up, they realize it's not, because
Reyn does.
Yeah, because as soon as Selden finishes saying, it's my story and my dragon, and I'm going to tell it, then Reyn throws off his hood.
And his veil, yeah.
And his veil. He pushes back his cowl as well, shook free his dark curly hair. He looked with shining copper eyes from face to face at the table, inviting each of them to stare at the scaling that now outlined his lips and brows and the ridge of the pebbled skin that defined his brow. When he looked at Selden, respect was in his eyes. It began much farther back than my young kinsman's memory, he said quietly. I suppose I was about half Selden's age the first time my father took me to the dragon's chamber from underground.
And so presumably he tells the tale of what goes on in the Rainwild, because I'm sure the words Elderling City were new to the 3 ships and the tattooed people there.
It's hard to know if Elderlings are a tale that every sort of society has.
I feel like we talked about that last trilogy, and I think it is.
Yeah,
because it's come up a couple times.
Yeah, the Mountain Kingdom talks about the Elderlings.
Mm-hmm.
Buckkeep all have Elderling stories, which makes sense because those kingdoms were directly touched by Elderlings in their founding history. But then also, I guess the Rainwilds in Bingtown, they call them Elderling cities as well. Yeah. How did they know that they're Elderlings that live there, Mm-hmm. So clearly, even though Elderlings no longer exist, they're at least some sort of myth and legend that has survived them.
Yeah.
And
probably kind of like Pexies and whatever the other things were that they mentioned.
Yeah. So I don't know. So I think that's interesting to think about, that like potentially Sparskelter does know, like Elderling City makes sense to him in that way. Like maybe his
it's like
family.
A myth, right?
Yeah. Like Elderlings are a myth. And so it's like, what do you mean you have access to an Elderling City?
Well, not anymore.
Yeah, it's true.
But yeah, so it's just kind of the first time getting confirmation of what they do there, and probably the first time seeing a Rainwild trader up close, let alone without a hood.
Yeah. And that's the price.
They wouldn't have had an opportunity to talk to any Rainwild trader before this.
Yeah. Technically, they didn't exist.
Yeah, they were never really mentioned.
Yeah. They talk, I guess that's also interesting to me, because you'd think that the Rainwilders sell Elderling goods, right? So,
well, treasures from the Rainwild River.
Right. So you don't think that they ever say that it's Elderling goods?
Maybe. Okay.
But yeah, so that's something that I thought.
It also could be something that they say to get a bigger price, because they're like, oh, it's a myth, it's a folktale. Of course, they're Elderling treasures.
Right. That could be too. Okay, good point. But yeah, so I'm just like thinking there has to be some speculation. And I'm frustrated that we never get to see his perspective that doesn't know about them and like what they think happens. Because Serilla, I mean, I guess we get Cerilla's point of view, but she kind of figured it out because she's a scholar and has been studying Bingtown and noticed some discrepancies.
And I'm sure the Three Ships people knew some sort of folk lived up there because...
Obviously, where else are they getting the stuff from?
People are sailing up there and getting goods come back. Obviously, people are living up there, but...
And I think Rainwild traders, like, go out in their garb, like, fully covered.
Probably, yeah.
Not often, for sure, but they still do, and everybody seems to know. There's got to be
rumors around the city, you know?
Yeah. But, I don't know.
That is, I agree with you. That's one sad part about this. We don't get peasant point of views of Bingtown and being like, ooh, these weird people walking around. I feel like, what are the conspiracy theories, you know?
I feel like Kekki would have been a great person to follow through the trilogy, but I guess, like, what kind of story can you write into one of those people that's not connected to this that would intertwine at this point?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I get it, but also wish it was there nonetheless.
Yeah, lots of stuff happens. We get some sort of melding of the minds here at the end.
Yeah, we do. I think it's nice to finally have everything laid out on the table. We're finally getting traction. It isn't just an idea that some people are discussing one-on-one. This is a real meeting with real repercussions and things being laid out on the table. It's really that old trader mentality of coming to the table and making negotiation.
It's also a really big setup chapter too. I mean, a lot happens this chapter, but we end with Malta having a ship sighted, the mothership or the big ship, right? For Chalcedeans. So something's going on, and Kekki dies.
Yes.
We have this meeting happening, but they're planning on going to the secret meeting later to interrupt Road Cairn and the other Bingtown council heads to take back their city later in the day. So things are really happening.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the meeting that they go to later, that's where Tintaglia shows up, right?
I think so. I think it all kind of converges there, and that's when Selden sings her praises and they make the thing. So I think everything is kind of happening relatively soon, but I'm sure since we're only on chapter 13, 14 here, it's going to take a while before we get there.
There's still stuff to happen in between.
Yeah.
I find it really interesting. Also, something that I wanted to bring up, Selden's weird maturity.
Yes. Yeah.
And I feel like this has to be magic based. Like this, the only explanation I can have for how suddenly wise he is through some sort of magic. And I don't know if that comes from him being in the city and having like somehow absorbed some other people's live memories or what happened, but who he was, the brief glances we got before the earthquake and who he is now, very different people. Not even the same kid, it feels like. And he seems wise beyond his years. And he becomes, it's like poetic,
he's a bard.
Right? Yeah, like singing the praises of Tintaglia later, and just really brings to mind, like, is this somehow influenced by Tintaglia or the skill or something? I don't know. But I guess kind of Wintro also talks like this and acts like this. But Wintro was like taught.
He was schooled.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's really confusing to me. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. If you have thoughts on Selden's maturity here or Keffria's reluctance to shift to a new point of view and then all of a sudden being the voice of reason in the room and all these different things, Malta's predicament, please let us know. You can find us at isfitshappy@gmail.com or any of our social medias. We're at isfitshappy, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, YouTube, all of those.
Yeah, we look forward to hearing what you have to say.